Welcome back, everybody. Today, we're going to be looking at a fascinating guy, William the Silent.
William the Silent.
Yeah, so you know how sometimes you look back at history and you see these figures and they just seem stuck between a rock and a hard place.
Right.
William is just like the poster child for that. I
Mhm.
mean, raised by like one of the most powerful guys in Europe.
Wow.
And he turns around and leads a revolt against him. Like family drama
Yeah.
on a
Epic scale.
epic scale.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So for this deep dive, we've got some really cool stuff to work with.
Yeah.
We've got an interview with Dr. Nick Ridley. He's like a leading expert on insurgency and terrorism.
Oh, wow.
And he brings this totally fresh perspective to this whole historical tale.
hmm
You know, he draws some like really thought-provoking parallels between what went down at the Dutch Revolt and like modern uprisings.
Oh, that's really interesting.
Yeah, so but before we like jump into all of Dr. Ridley's insights,
Right.
let's just kind of set the stage.
Okay. Yeah. Context is key.
Yeah, totally. So imagine Europe in the 16th century. It's like everything's changing.
Huge change.
There's all this religious upheaval.
Yeah. Power dynamics are shifting.
It's a wild time.
It's a crazy time.
All right, so picture this. 1533, William of Orange is born
Okay.
into a noble family, obviously inherits all these vast estates,
Please.
including this little place called the Principality of Orange in France.
Okay.
Now he's raised Catholic in the court of Holy Roman Emperor Charles V.
Wow. Talk about an upbringing.
I know, right?
Yeah.
What a way to start life.
Yeah. And I mean, Charles V was no ordinary emperor, right?
Right. He was like top dog,
The most powerful ruler in Europe.
presiding over this massive empire.
Exactly.
Yeah, this environment, it really like shaped William Wright,
Yeah.
exposed him to all the power plays, the diplomacy, and like,
Yeah, the religious tensions that were kind of bubbling under the surface everywhere.
right. And you know what's crazy?
What?
He even fought for Charles V.
Really?
Yeah, in several campaigns.
Wow.
So you'd think pretty loyal subject, at least at first.
Yeah, you would think so.
But hold on, because here comes Charles V's heir, his son, Philip II.
Oh.
This is where things get really interesting.
This is where the seeds of conflict are sown, right?
Yes.
Okay, so Charles V, he's getting on in years, and he decides to split up this massive empire of his.
Right.
And Philip II, this devout Catholic and like way more rigid than his father,
Solely.
inherits Spain and the Netherlands.
And this is where William's story takes this crazy turn.
It does.
Right. So now we've got William raised in this kind of like more tolerant environment.
Right.
And he's facing Philip.
Yeah.
Who is just dead set on like squashing any kind of challenge to his authority, especially when it comes to religion.
Exactly. And we're smack dab in the middle of the Protestant Reformation, a time of huge religious upheaval.
Right. Philip's ruling from afar. And he sees this whole Protestant thing as a direct threat to his Catholic faith and his power. He starts putting all these harsh policies in place in the Netherlands, like strict laws against heresy, reorganize the church, and he appoints these hardliners like Cardinal Granville to enforce his will.
Wow.
So, okay, let's talk about Cardinal Granville for a second. From what I've read, he was not exactly Mr. Popular in the Netherlands.
Not at all. I mean, Granville was seen as an outsider,
Right.
a symbol of Philip's heavy-handed rule.
Totally.
You know, his attempts to centralize power and enforce this religious uniformity, they were met with a lot of resistance from the Dutch nobility.
Makes us they were used to a certain degree of autonomy, right?
Exactly, and they had their own interest to protect.
Of course.
Yeah.
So this is where William starts to kind of step up. Right.
Yeah.
He's not just a nobleman anymore.
He's becoming a leader.
Exactly.
Someone who can bridge the gap between the Dutch people and their increasingly distant and,
Authoritarian ruler.
Yeah, you said it.
Yeah. So you're starting to see like the emergence of
Yeah.
William, the politician.
Right, the diplomat.
Right. He and some other prominent nobles, they push back against Granville. They're urging Philip to like chill out a bit with the policies.
To moderate.
Yeah. And they even presented Philip with a petition demanding Granville's removal.
Wow, so they're basically saying enough is enough.
Right.
Yeah, that takes guts, especially with Philip's reputation.
Totally. So did Philip even listen to them?
Well, Philip was never one to back down easily.
Of course not.
But in this case, he had to make a strategic retreat.
Yeah.
The pressure from the Dutch nobility was too strong.
Yeah.
And he realized that pushing too hard could backfire big time.
Right.
So reluctantly, he recalled Granville.
So a small victory for William and the Dutch nobles.
Yeah.
But I'm guessing this was just the beginning.
Oh, yeah, just the tip of the iceberg.
Right, because Philip's not going to just suddenly change his mind about wanting to control the Netherlands.
Exactly. Philip's overall strategy remained the same.
Right.
He was still determined to wipe out heresy and consolidate his power.
Okay, so this brings us to a really important moment.
What's that?
The Edict of 1566.
Oh, yeah, this is a major turning point.
Right. It basically outlawed all forms of heresy.
It was a huge escalation of tension.
Totally. So this edict, it was like super extreme.
It was draconian.
Right. It sent shockwaves through the Netherlands. I mean, even people who had tolerated Philip's earlier moves saw this as like a step too far.
That was a bridge too far.
So how did William react to this?
Yeah.
I mean, he was still a Catholic.
Right.
But he was also known for being more tolerant.
Well, William was in a tough spot.
Right.
He was still hoping for a peaceful solution.
Yeah.
A way to bridge the divide between Philip and the Dutch people.
Makes sense.
But this edict, it made it crystal clear that Philip wasn't interested in compromise.
He was going to do it his way or the highway.
Exactly. He was determined to impose his will no matter the cost.
So William's facing a real dilemma here.
Yay.
Stay loyal to this ruler who's becoming increasingly tyrannical.
Yeah.
Or stand up for the rights and freedoms of his people.
Tough choice.
So what did he do?
Well, he did what he always did.
What's that?
He tried to find a middle ground.
Okay.
He joined a group of nobles who drafted this petition called the Compromise of Nobles.
Okay.
And they presented this document to Margaret of Parma, who was Philip's regent in the Netherlands.
Okay.
And they basically pleaded with Philip to moderate his policies, to allow some degree of religious tolerance.
So like a last-ditch effort at diplomacy.
Right, a plea for reason.
So what did Philip say?
He ignored them completely.
Are you serious?
Yeah.
What an arrogant jerk.
I know, right?
It's like he wanted a confrontation.
It seems that way.
So did this finally push William over the edge?
It definitely didn't help.
Right.
The rejection of the compromise and the continued enforcement of the edict created this atmosphere of fear and resentment.
Oh, totally.
And this tension that had been simmering beneath the surface, it was about to erupt in a big way.
Okay. This is getting good, but before we get into that eruption, let's take a step back and look at William's early life and his relationship with Philip in more detail.
That's a good idea.
Because, understanding their personal dynamics adds this whole other layer of complexity to this story.
Totally. To understand why William ultimately chose rebellion, we need to dig into his past, his experiences, the key events that shaped his worldview.
Absolutely.
So welcome back to our deep dive into William the Silent.
Yeah, so last time we were talking about how William was facing this huge decision.
Right.
Stay loyal to Philip or stand up for his people.
Yeah, a real crossroads.
But to really understand how tough this decision was, we need to go back a bit further and look at William's relationship with Philip II.
Okay, so let's rewind the tape a bit.
So I've been reading up on this, and it seems like there was tension between these two from the start, even before Philip took over.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
But what caused that?
Well, their personalities were just completely different.
Oh, really?
Yeah. William was raised in this strict court, but he was known for being a diplomat,
Right.
a pragmatist, and even somewhat religiously tolerant.
Yeah.
Philip, on the other hand, super devout.
Right.
Rigid in his beliefs and not really into compromise.
Sounds like a recipe for disaster, especially with all the religious turmoil going on in Europe back then.
It was, and that tension was brought into focus with William's marriage to Anna of Saxony in 1551.
Ah, yes, Anna.
Now, Anna was a devout Protestant, and her father had a pretty complicated history with Charles V.
Oh, really?
Yeah, even betrayed him at one point.
Oh, wow.
So you can imagine this marriage didn't sit well with Philip.
I bet not marrying into a Protestant family.
Right, especially one that opposed the Habsburgs.
Yeah, that must have felt like a direct challenge to Philip's hardcore Catholicism.
It was definitely seen as a sign that William wasn't fully on board with Philip's way of thinking.
Right.
It fueled Philip's suspicions about William's loyalty and sowed the seeds for the conflict that would come later.
So this marriage, it was more than just like a personal thing?
Oh, yeah, it was a political statement, a sign of the growing divide between them.
Wow. And that divide got even deeper a few years later. During the peace negotiations between Philip II and Henry II of France in 1559,
Ah, yes.
William and the Duke of Alba were both part of the Spanish delegation.
Right.
Now, Alba, we all know he was like Philip's attack dog.
Right, hardline Catholic.
Ah, exactly.
Yeah.
And during these negotiations, Alba said some pretty scary things about wiping out Protestantism.
Really?
Yeah, starting with the Netherlands.
He said that in front of William?
Yep. He completely misjudged William's stance.
Wow.
Assumed he was on board with crushing heresy.
It really shows the difference between them.
Right.
And it was a warning to William about Philip's true intentions.
So William's stuck in this super awkward situation,
Totally.
hearing these plans, realizing just how intolerant Philip was.
It must have been unsettling.
It was a pivotal moment for William.
It was.
It forced him to see what Philip's rule really meant and the threat it posed to the Netherlands.
Right.
This incident, along with the growing unrest among the Dutch people, pushed him further toward resistance.
So the stage is set.
Exactly. We've got William becoming more and more disillusioned with Philip.
Right.
A sense of unrest is brewing in the Netherlands.
And then boom.
The Edict of 1566.
Right. Throws fuel on the fire.
It was the final straw for so many people.
Absolutely. It sparked protests, demonstrations, culminating in the iconoclastic fury of 1566.
Ah, yes, the iconoclastic fury mobs rampaging through churches, destroying religious imagery.
It was a chaotic outburst of anti-Catholic sentiment.
So much pent-up anger and frustration.
Definitely.
So how did William react to this?
Yeah, he was a proponent of religious tolerance, but this was out of control.
It was.
He was appalled by the violence.
Right.
Remember, William was a pragmatist.
Yeah.
He knew this kind of unrest would give Philip an excuse to crack down even harder.
Oh, yeah.
So he actually tried to restore order, using his influence to calm things down and prevent more bloodshed.
So he's still trying to keep a lid on things.
Yeah, prevent total chaos.
Was it too late, though?
Philip wasn't appeased at all.
Of course not.
He saw the iconoclastic fury as proof that the Netherlands was full of heretics and rebels.
Oh, man.
He decided to respond with overwhelming force.
Enter the Duke of Alba,
Exactly the Iron Fist.
sent to crush dissent and impose Philip's will by any means necessary.
Alba's arrival in 1567 marked the end of any hope for a peaceful solution.
Right. He came to eradicate heresy, punish other rebels, and take back total control for Spain.
And he didn't mess around.
No disbanding local troops, installing his own council, imposing crazy taxes, setting up the Council of Blood.
Alba's reign was terrifying.
It was thousands were arrested, tortured, executed, or forced to flee.
He wasn't interested in talking or compromise.
His mission was to crush any resistance and make an example of anyone who defied Philip.
This was the breaking point for William.
Yeah.
Alba's brutality destroyed any chance of reconciliation.
It was the declaration of war.
It was.
And William, although hesitant at first, felt he had no choice but to fight back.
So in 1568, William launched his first rebellion.
Wow. Raising an army of mercenaries, making alliances with the French Huguenots, and building his own fleet.
It was a huge gamble.
It was going up against the mighty Spanish Empire.
David versus Goliath.
But despite the odds, William was determined to fight for his people's freedom.
He knew this was a fight for the soul of the Netherlands.
And that fight, as we all know, was long and hard, full of setbacks and victories.
It was.
But before we get into the military campaigns and the political maneuvering of the Dutch Revolt, let's hear what Dr. Ridley has to say about what makes a rebellion successful.
That's a great idea. His 4 factors provide a really helpful framework for understanding William's actions and the challenges he faced.
Yeah, it's a reminder that history isn't just fascinating. It can also teach us valuable lessons about power resistance and the fight for freedom in any era.
Exactly.
So, welcome back to the deep dive. We were talking about William the Silent taking that leap into open rebellion against Philip II.
What a bold move.
It was a huge risk-taking on the Spanish Empire. But, as we discussed, William had a plan. Right, and I want to hear more about that plan, especially with those 4 factors for rebel success that Dr. Ridley talked about.
Right.
You mentioned strong leadership, military strength, financial backing, and favorable international circumstances.
Yeah.
How did William handle all of that against a way bigger and stronger enemy?
Well, let's start with leadership.
Right.
William had this amazing ability to inspire people to get them on his side. He was known for being charismatic, a good diplomat, and committed to religious tolerance. Those qualities were so important in uniting the different provinces in the Netherlands.
Right, because they all had their own little agendas and rivalries.
Exactly, and that leads us to military strength. Now, William wasn't a military genius,
Right.
but he understood strategy, he was great at using his resources, he knew he couldn't beat the Spanish head-on, so he went with this more flexible guerrilla-style approach. He used the sea beggars to mess with Spanish shipping and harass their troops.
Ah, the sea beggars. Those were some real characters. Pirates turned rebel heroes. They were a pain in the neck for the Spanish.
They were, and their effectiveness shows something else about William's strategy delegation. He knew he couldn't control every tiny detail of the rebellion.
Right.
He had to trust his guys and give them clear goals and let them do their thing.
So it's not just about having a big army. It's about strategy adapting and building a solid team.
Exactly, and that brings us to Financial backing. Wars are expensive, and rebellions even more so. William knew that, and he worked hard to get financial support for the cause.
I bet. Where did he get the money to fight an empire like Spain that must have cost a fortune?
He was pretty resourceful. He tapped into the Dutch merchants, levied taxes, and even got loans from other countries who wanted to see Spain weakened. He also made sure to use the money wisely, investing in ship's forts and training for his troops.
He was playing the game on all sides, military, political, even financial, basically building a country from scratch while fighting a war for independence.
Exactly. That's what makes his story so incredible. He wasn't just a military leader. He was a statesman, a diplomat, a visionary who knew that winning the war was only the first step he had to create a real independent nation that could stand on its own.
And that brings us to the final factor: favorable international circumstances. No rebellion can succeed without some help from the outside. How did William deal with the complex politics of 16th century Europe?
He was a master at playing the game. He understood that Spain, for all its power, had enemies. He took advantage of those rivalries, building alliances with England, France, and some German princes who were worried about Spain getting too strong.
So he's using diplomacy to find the weak spots in the Spanish Empire.
Exactly. And that international support was vital. It gave him the military and financial help he needed, and it made the Dutch cause look legitimate to the rest of Europe.
So all four of Dr. Ridley's factors were in play. It's amazing.
It really is, and that's why William's story is still relevant today. It reminds us that even when things seem impossible, a determined person with a clear vision and a good plan can change the world.
That's a powerful thought. It shows how resilient people can be. The desire for freedom and the willingness to fight for what's right, even when it feels impossible.
Absolutely. And while the Dutch Revolt happened centuries ago, the lessons we can learn from it are timeless, strong leadership, strategic thinking, financial stability, and international alliances. Those are just as important today as they were back then.
Well said. So I think it's time to wrap up this deep dive. Any final thoughts for our listeners?
Just this William the Silent story is a testament to the power of never giving up the importance of fighting for what you believe in and the possibility of achieving the impossible. His legacy lives on not just in the Dutch Republic, but in the hearts and minds of everyone who is inspired by his courage and vision.
That's a great way to put it. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the life and times of William the Silent. If you want to learn more, check out Dr. Ridley's book, William the Silent and the Dutch Revolt. It's a fantastic read. And if you enjoyed this deep dive, don't forget to subscribe to our podcast for more journeys into the fascinating world of history. Until next time, keep learning, keep exploring, and keep diving deep.